What was your childhood like in OLB?
Well, first of all, my mother picked this place primarily because we were very young and she was very pro-education. And she wanted to make sure we all got jobs, however young we were. My younger brother was 9, I was 10, my older brother 11, and my sister 13. We moved here in 1945 from Waterville, Maine. My dad had died in 1943, 33 years of age in Biddeford, and he died an alcoholic. So it left my mother with the 4 kids. So working and getting a good education was very important to her, and we were very successful at it.
What is your favorite memory of OLB?
I think it was when I was town manager. The town really got together after the 1978 storm. A huge, huge storm in February. And it damaged bulkheads, wooden ones or cement ones, immensely. And so they petitioned the town to engage in what they called a dune grass management program, because we'd lost a lot of the beach, a lot of bulkheads had been damaged, a lot of cottages had knocked off the foundations, and the pier broke in half, and a major portion of it went out to sea. So they had heard from some of the people in Agunquit that they had planted dune grass, so-called. We started talking about planting grass to protect the bulkheads and the abutting property. They thought we were crazy because they thought we were going to plant regular grass that you put in your backyard. But we got a grant, a federal grant, for $40,000, 140,000 seedlings called culms, C-U-L-M-S. And you had to have a stick about a yard, pointed, stick it in the sand along a rope that was measured the length of the stick apart, and put in a seedling. Now the seedling, the roots of the seedling went down 15 feet to the water's edge, to the bottom. That was salt water, of course. And that's why they were so successful. The prevailing wind went from Goose Fair Brook, which is, beyond Ocean Park, to Scarborough and Proud's Neck in that direction. So the grasses, as they grew, it trapped the sand. And if it was in '79 when we had many citizens from Old Orchard, and some of our friends that we made friends of from Agunquit. And one woman from Agunquit wrote such a great story about it, we published it in our own town report. The grass since then, if you go at the end of Union Avenue or Temple Avenue, anywhere in Old Orchard where we planted that 3 miles of grass, you'll see that the grade increased upward and seaward. And it's very, very rare now that any storm would jeopardize any property beyond the bulkheads. A lot of volunteers donated their times. We got a lot of publicity on it. The federal government that gave us the grant told us it was the best program in the state of Maine.
Awesome. What do you remember about going to school here?
What did I learn about joining the school here?
Yeah, what did you remember about going to school here?
I remember, well, as I indicated to you, my mother was very, very pro-education. And so I remember every single teacher, in fact. We moved here in 1945, and I had an accent, a Franco-American accent from the parochial schools in Waterville, and before that, Biddeford. So when we moved here, I was 10. The kids laughed at my accent. And the same kids that laughed at me in the 5th grade voted for me for class president when I got to be a senior. So it wasn't like the pangs of prejudice that Franco, African Americans suffered, but there were some wisecracks about my accent. You couldn't cut it with a chainsaw. So Helen Grant, and the teachers then got about $2,500 a year, would have me on Saturday mornings hitchhike to Saco, across from Rapid Rays, on top of Key Bank. She lived there with her daughter. Gave me free English lessons. My mother worked for 35 cents an hour with 4 kids at Butler's department store. So obviously couldn't compensate her, and Mrs. Grant must have known about it. She never asked for any money. She would give me extra work. Then in the 6th grade, I had Helen Marshall. She was very strict, but she also gave me extra work. My mother thought I was getting so much work that was because I was misbehaving. I think it was because the teachers had talked about it. Then Deanie Davis Fitzgerald was my 7th grade teacher. And she knew physically I was a rugged kid. And in those days, we didn't have Little League for football or baseball or basketball. But I was working out on my own, and she encouraged me. She had been a great basketball player for Old Orchard Beach High School. So I would run so many miles a day, and I'd exercise every day. It benefited me as I went on. Then my 8th grade teacher, very strict teacher, was Helen Marshall. She also gave me a lot of extra work. She was very strict, but also she would ask me to talk to boys that were misbehaved. For some reason, she thought they would believe me. And she must have thought so, because when I got in high school, Herbert R. being the principal, he used me as an aide as well. It might have been because I was built like a hydrant and I was in very good shape. I'd like to hope it's because I was very friendly. Those are my elementary school teachers. Loved the education.
What year did you graduate from high school?
I graduated from high school in 1954. And I enjoyed high school very much, studied very hard, was the only boy that made what they call the National Honor Society in my senior year. They have a photo in the yearbook with 4 girls and myself. Ever since then, I've been telling people, and I can prove it, that girls at a high school age are smarter than the boys. And if you want proof, this spring, read whenever high school publishes their top 10 students. I've never seen it where the boys had, say, 6 out of 4, that it would be a majority. It's usually always 7 to 3 girls or 6 to 4 girls. So I maintain that I knew what I was talking about.
Okay. What was your first job in OOB?
My first job was at 10 years of age, when we moved from Waterville, like I said. I was a bellhop at the Old Orchard House. Worked very hard. Then when I went on to high school, I was a clerk there. When I was 30 years after that, 45, that would be 30 years after, I bought the hotel, because I knew I had to do more than just being town manager, because I had 4 kids to help keep the debts of college down. College then wasn't anything what it is today, but it was still pretty substantial if you had 4 going to college roughly at the same time, and some going on to graduate school. So I was a bellhop. That was my first job. I got 50 cents an hour plus tips. Gave all the money to my mother.
Okay.
The bands on the pier and at the Palace Theater were famous, like Duke Ellington, Count Basie, Louis Armstrong, and they couldn't find rooms when they came here to entertain us. We went on the pier, danced before them, cheered them, bragged about them, but somehow every time they came to most of the hotels, they were told the rooms were filled or all reserved. That bothered me. So when I became a legislator in the early 60s, during the height of the civil rights movement, I introduced a bill for anti-discrimination in public housing, and it passed. I had support from Jerry Talbot, who was active in the NAACP in Portland, a Republican minister up in Bangor, also helped me out get the Republican votes, because at that time I was in the Democratic leadership and we were in the minority in the legislature. And it's now law today. No one can tell anyone because of his race, color, or creed that there's no room in the inn.
At your first job, what was your pay?
My pay was 50 cents an hour plus my tip when I was 10 years of age. I gave my mother the money. I did better than most of the other bellhops because I was bilingual. Remember I said they laughed about my accent? We had attracted, of course, a lot of Canadians from Quebec primarily, and Ontario, of course, and the coastal provinces in Canada. So I would get better tips from Canadians than other kids did, because when I was shown their rooms and speaking to them, I spoke their language. So I did very well. So it was not a liability for me at that point. It was an asset.
And do you know what the age was that you could get a job then?
They didn't have the limit that they have now working at hotels.
Right.
So I was very fortunate. They must have been desperate for work also when they hired a 10-year-old. But I don't want to brag just about myself. My brother Mark, 9 years of age, sold hot dogs on the beach at the end of Staples Street. And he studied. He became a superintendent of schools. I became 65 years of public service, 15 years of record breaking as town manager. My younger brother pulled balloons out of boards, and dots from balloons rather, what is now Palace Playland. He taught school for 34 years, 4 in Wiscasset, 30 in Kittery. My brother Mark, I told you, became a superintendent of schools. My sister was a chambermaid at 13 at a small hotel called the Tidewater, where the parking lot for the Brunswick Hotel is now. She wanted to go stay at Mount Mercy Academy in Waterville, where she had gone for 2 years, but she had to earn the money for it, so she was a chambermaid. She worked very hard and became the first woman president of the University of Southern Maine, Dr. Patricia R. Plante. She's the only one in our family with a PhD. Mark and I had an undergraduate and a master's, and Richard just a BA. But that's what good working does, pro-education does, and not being lazy.